I stood at the side of the road, my anxiety at its highest it's ever been, as I waited for my mother to arrive. I was crying, terrified, and unsure of what I was supposed to do. New experiences are always a stressful situation for me, especially this one. I looked over at the source of my panic, hating myself over my stupidity. In the middle of the road sat a totaled Buick, my car. I had hit a guardrail on my way home from work and crushed the right half of my car's front. Officers were picking up pieces of wreckage and throwing them to the side of the street to be picked up later. I wanted to help them, to try and make up for my mistake, but they wanted me to stay at the side of the road as they directed the now backed up traffic. This was the first time I totaled my car, but not the first time I had an accident. My father and I were driving across country to Maryland, where we were going to live for a set amount of time, which ended up being a year and a half. On the way there, him and I would switch seats, with me tasked with driving when we only had a long stretch of highway for a while. It was my second time in the driver's seat, but the cruise turned on and me only in charge of the steering. It was the evening and my dad was trying to sleep in the passenger seat, but that did not last long. I noticed some construction was up ahead. My conscience was yelling, screaming at me to slow down, but I didn't listen to it. As the cones directed us to one lane, I realized my mistake when it was too late. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching and waking my dad from his slumber. We drove off the highway and landed in the grass, but by some miracle my car turned quickly and we drove back up onto the off-ramp. The landing caused the tire to blow, but we were able to stop safely and intact. I am thankful that I survived that day, and I learned to slow down when construction is nearby. Just wish I learned to listen to my conscience. 2 years later, I am driving home from work early in the morning. As I was driving, I ignored my conscience again as it screamed at me the most important rule when driving. Keep your eyes on the road. I was more interested in looking at my throat in the rearview mirror, trying to find what was bothering it. I had started to veer off onto the side of the road and put myself back on course, but went right back to finding the annoyance on my tonsils. I went to look back at the road again, but was instead met with a loud crash and a spinning motion. When it came to a stop, I sat there for a few seconds confused, the smell of an airbag hitting my nostrils before my mind caught up to what had happened and I screamed in fear. I got out of my car, screaming and crying at the damage. I felt anger, guilt, and sadness hit me as people stopped their vehicles. A lady approached me and asked if I was okay. I don't remember what I said, but she knew what to do as the location was a common accident spot. Someone called the police, who showed up and took control of the situation. After calling my mother and father to explain what happened, I stood at the side of the road freaking out. A mix of emotions swirling around me. I kept looking at my phone, watching the time go as minutes ticked by. It was only around half an hour, but it felt like hours as I waited for my family to come. I only wanted some comfort in this moment, to escape the sight of the accident. When my mother and stepfather arrived, I was immediately pulled into a hug. I cried and kept apologizing. My mom said she was just happy that I was not hurt or worse. I only had a scratch on my arm from the crash, but I wasn't focused on that. The only thing on my mind was how stupid I was. That if I had just listened to my conscience and paid attention to driving, I would have avoided the guardrail and kept my car. Nowadays, I look back at the moment as a learning experience. But to this day, I don't like driving. I used to enjoy it and be alone with my thoughts, but instead I panic more and keep having flashbacks to that day. I'm glad I only suffered a scratch from the accident when it could have been much worse.